So moving on to the other fire planet. So I'll go to Aries. Aries is a fire sign, of course. It's the first fire sign in the zodiac out of all the 12 houses. 12 houses, but 12 signs rather. So the planet that rules Aries is Mars. Mars is another fiery planet, super fiery. Mars is actually, I would say, out of the 10 planets, Mars is probably one of my favorite ones, and I'll explain why. Because it's super important when it comes to progressed aspects, and that's how you time. So let's say you have a progressed aspect between two planets, and they're within 1 degree. They're active like they're supposed to be, right? But it's the transiting planet, but they have to be turned on, in other words. So they're active, and let's say a progressed aspect could be active for a period of like 3 years. And 3 years is kind of a long time for a aspect to be active. Depending on the planets, it could be longer than that or shorter than that. And so because of that, you need something to activate, or you need a trigger to make the event that's being described with the progressed aspect take place. That's where Mars comes in, because when Mars transits and makes contact with at least one of the planets in that progressed aspect, that's when something happens. And so Mars has been quite influential in me timing events for myself. So I think that's why Mars is one of my favorite planets, because I use it all the time to time things. So that's one thing about Mars that you would want to know. It's such an active planet that it could time things. Now there's another planet that can be used for timing with progressions, and that's not in this episode. When I get to that episode, I'll talk about that one. But this one I would say is the most important one, because it takes Mars about roughly like a year or so, give or take, to make its rounds. Mars, like Mercury, can also go retrograde, and that just means that it can move backwards or appear to move backwards. So when it does that, it'll start to, usually it goes in order, like 5 degrees Cancer, 6 degrees Cancer, 7 degrees Cancer. If it hits retrograde, then it starts to go back to 6 degrees, 3 degrees, 5 degrees for a period of time, and then it goes back direct again and keeps going forward. So you have its temporary retrograde periods, but typically Mars usually moves fairly quickly around the zodiac, whereas the more generational planets, quote unquote, takes them years to get just through one sign. So Mars moves pretty quickly, which makes it a really important planet for timing events. It's an action planet. So not only does that relate to progressed aspects, but it also relates to your chart as well. Wherever Mars is in your chart, especially the house it's in, that may be an area of your life where you are particularly active and you may take more control. It may even be an area of your life where you could be hot-headed or particularly unyielding about something, and you just want to be independent and do things your own way. It's very similar to the sign Aries. And so this is why I'm not really a fan of saying that any signs are all good or all bad. I know we have our favorite signs, which is usually our own sun sign, right? But the reality is we have all of the signs in our chart, and we have all of the planets that rules those signs in our chart. So we really have the energies of those signs in some area of our life. And so, for instance, if your Mars is in your 10th house, so the 10th house rules the career. So you probably be pretty ambitious and pretty driven, just like an Aries might be. So that's something to keep in mind. So wherever Mars is, that's where you'll be very active. That's where you may take charge. That's where you'll be ambitious. That may be the area of your life where you have the most courage. You don't mind jumping out there and doing something, whether you have all the information or not. But you'll be very determined to win, regardless whether you have all of the information or not. You're gonna make sure that you win, that you take the prize. If you don't, you probably won't like it too much. but that's part of your ambitious nature, your drive. So we all have a drive somewhere, and wherever Mars shows up, that's where your drive is. Now, on the other side of that, the flip side, Mars also rules things like war and anger and fighting and arguing. So this is important to note as well, because wherever Mars shows up in your chart, that may be a place that you are most likely to have strife in your life. And for this, you want to look at the house the planet is in and the house the planet rules. You would also want to look at the planets that make some type of aspect to Mars or have some type of relationship with Mars, whether they are conjunct, meaning they're really close to Mars, or they form a square, or they're opposite, like exactly opposite to Mars. Sometimes those can show that you're going to have some type of issues, conflict in those areas related to the planets and the houses involved. So you want to keep a lookout for that. Mars is funny like that. Whenever there's conflict or there's a lot of disagreements, it's pretty predictable in terms of the areas that it tends to show up in. And so you definitely want to pay attention to that. And when I'm saying this, I'm also thinking about like Synastry, which is the area of astrology where they concentrate on compatibility. You almost always know a couple that has like squares or oppositions related to Mars, because they're going to be the couple that argues all the time. You ever see those couples that no matter what, they're always bickering or arguing? Those are probably two people who have, one of them has a Mars that, squares or opposes the other person's Mercury or something like that. And that's why they bicker and argue so much. So I just thought that was a funny thing to mention, because I can think of a couple that is like that. And I used to wonder why they argued so much. And then I looked at their charts and I said, it was Mars. So I was like, okay, I see now. I understand why they argue so much. So that's kind of how Mars will show itself as a tendency to argue. And so I guess that's where the courage also comes in. Like, I don't care about keeping the peace. I'm going to make my point regardless, and you just do whatever you want to do afterwards. It's a very conscious aggression that's overt and out there for everybody to see.